Hi, and welcome to Using CSS to Enhance Your Website, offered to you by the Clifton Park Half Moon Library. This is a 3-session class, and it's the sequel to the previous class that was offered back in June, HTML Fundamentals. And once you register with the Clifton Park Half Moon Library and provide your email address, I will invite you to the Google Classroom for this class that will provide a bunch of different exercises and some reference material. So make sure you register. The class is being held on Tuesday. The first session is Tuesday, July 7th. So why don't we get started? And before we jump into CSS, first of all, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So basically, it's adding style to your web pages. And I left off with the HTML class, the last session, talking briefly about forms. And I wanted to start today's session going into a little more depth with HTML forms because they're used quite extensively, and I just feel like it's very important that you understand it. So let's start with HTML forms, and then we will cover a whole bunch of CSS. So with HTML forms, a form is a collection of user input. So the user input can then be sent to a server for processing. So if you look on my screen, off to the left, I'm using Notepad, which every Windows machine has Notepad. And if you're using a Mac, it's a different text editor. I'm not sure what it is. So with Notepad, you can enter in your programs. For those of you who took the HTML class previously, we use Notepad to enter in our program and then run it from there into the web browser. So with a form, an HTML form, we're going to take, first we're going to have the form element, right? So the form tag. So we'll have form, and we'll have a closing form down below, which is / FORM, and then a greater than sign. So those are the form tags. And that defines a form that is used to collect user input. So within our form, you have a whole bunch of elements. And the main element is an input element. Okay, so the input element is the most important form element, and it's displayed in several ways, depending on the type of attribute you use. The first input type that we're going to use is the type text. So inside my form tags, I'm going to have, first I'm going to need a label for my input. So # label for equals double quotes fname, and then a greater than sign, and then I will type in the label, first name, colon, and then # then we'll have this closing label tag. And then we'll do a line break. I don't know if you remember the BR tag that will give you a line break, and it's only a single tag. It's not an opening and closing tag. So you have $sign BR / greater than sign. So that'll skip down the line. And now I'm going to add the input statement. So $sign and the keyword is input equals double quote. Sorry. And you have to give it a type. So the type attribute equals, in this case, text. Then I'm going to give it an ID so I can reference it. And I'm going to call this fname. That'll be my ID. And then I'll give it a name. So that's the other attribute you use in the input tag. And double quotes. And I'll call this fname also. All right. So now I'm going to run it. And the way we run it, first you have to save your file in Notepad. So off to the left, I click on, in the upper left-hand corner, I click on File, and then I click on Save As. And on your computer, I want you to create a folder on your hard drive, and you can call it, I'll create a new folder. I didn't have to do that. I will create a new folder called CSS, my C drive. So CSS, hit enter. So now I have a new folder called CSS. Double click on that to open it up. And then for the file name, now in Notepad, you have to make sure the save as type down here that says text documents.txt is all files, because in HTML, you have to have, the extension has to be .html, and it cannot be .txt, otherwise it won't run in the web browser. So I'm going to call this form.txt, sorry, form.html, and I will save it. Now the file is saved as form.html. So if you right click in the lower left-hand corner on the start, and you click File Explorer, File Explorer comes up. Now go into your folder, which is C drive for me, and then CSS. And there's my form.html file. If you double click on it, it will open it up in a web browser. So I double click. And I'm going to open it in Google Chrome. That's my browser of choice. And click OK. And there it is. I'm going to shrink this down. So if you look over into the right-hand side of my screen, I've got my web browser displaying the label first name, and then it's got a text box. So I can enter my name. So I enter Shot, right? And it allows for text. And then on your form, well, anyway. So that's a text field. So now let's take a look at another type of input. No. The next input tag we're going to talk about is the submit tag. So with the submit tag, we're going to have an action tied to the submit. So up in the form tag, we're going to add the attribute, the action attribute. So I add action equals, and I'm going to do double quotes / and I'm going to call it, I'm going to call one of my previous files. So how about form text .html, and then close it with a double quote. All right, so now I'm going to keep the label, I'm going to keep the radio button. So I've got male and female gender radio buttons. And then lastly, down here, indented inside the form tags, I'll have an input tag, and the type is going to equal double quote submit. Value equals double quotes submit. So let's give this a try. I've already saved it. My file is form submit. So I'll save these changes. And now I will right click on File Explorer, on Start, and then File Explorers, and then click on your folder, mine is CSS. And I'm going to run up. Sorry, once again, I made a mistake. And I didn't save it correctly. So I'll do a file, save as. And I'll go to my file. And I want to save as all files. And I'll do form submit.html. Now I'll run that file. File Explorer, CSS, and I'm going to run form submit. And if you look over to the right, I've got my web browser, and it brought up the male, female, gender radio buttons. And off to the right of it, I've got a submit button. Now, when I click submit, it should go out and do whatever action I told the form to do. So I'm saying action equals form text.html in the same folder that my form submit file lives. So if I click that, it should take me over. Sorry, I made a mistake with the action. The action is not going to take us to another HTML page. I would need like an action page, say action _ page.php or a JavaScript page, something, another programming language that would allow me to do some dynamic things. Strike what I said before, this does not go out to an HTML page. So I don't have an example for you tonight, but this is how you would create a submit button. And if you wanted to load it up to a database, the information that you gather up from your form can be loaded up to a database just by using the form action attribute and sending it to the correct page of a program that will connect with like a database. Okay, so one last thing with HTML forms, I want to show you a select element that allows you to do drop-down boxes. All right, so Let's get rid of the action attribute in our form. All right. And why don't we open it up with a select? So here's my select tag. I'll give it an ID. And say we're going to have a drop down of cars, car types. For cars. My name, I'm going to call it the same thing. So I'll call it cars. And then you do a closing tag. Next, inside my select, I'm going to have options. So I can get rid of all this stuff here. Okay, so you want to indent inside the select tag. And I'll do an option. I'll give it a value. And first one I'll do is Volvo. Sorry. Value equals double quotes. And we'll call it Volvo. Double quotes. And now close that tag out. Then I'll give it a value of Volvo. And then I will close out the option tag. Put that out. So now I have one option. And why don't I do two more? So I'll copy and paste this. Paste it. And paste it. And so my next car will be a nice, how about a nice Porsche? Porsche. Spell that right. Porsche. And then the other Volvo will be a Toyota. And I'll give it a value of Toyota. Okay, so now we have 3 items in our drop-down box. And the only thing left to do is we have to close out the select tag. So lesson sign / select. And then greater than sign without the L. And now I'm going to do file save as. Going to my CSS folder and my save as type. I'm going to save all files. And I'm going to call this one form select.html. Hit enter. And then I'll scoot this over. Right click on the start, click on File Explorer. And then go into your folder, CSS folder, and I want to click on Form Submit. Form Select. Double click, and it should open up a drop-down box in my web browser. Off to the right, you can see this pretty small little drop-down box. So it starts with the first value I give it, which is Volvo. And then when I click on this down arrow, it should show Volvo, Porsche, and then Toyota. And that's what it does. Now I can choose Porsche, and then Porsche becomes the selected item. Or I can choose Toyota. All right, and this is all on a form. And that's how you do a select. So that's it. That's it for HTML forms. I just wanted to cover that as quick as possible, and now we'll start with CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. It describes how HTML elements are to be displayed on screen, paper, or in any other media. CSS saves a lot of work. it can control the layout of multiple web pages all at once by having a single CSS file that you tie to multiple web pages. You can make one change in that file and get the changes you want across multiple web pages. That's how it saves you a lot of work. So why use CSS? CSS is used to define styles for your web pages, including the design, layout, and variations in display for different devices and screen sizes. So with CSS, it solved a really big problem because originally HTML was created, and HTML was never intended to contain tags for formatting a web page. It was created to describe the content of a web page, like headings, paragraphs, lists. When tags like font and color attributes were added to HTML, it became a real problem for developers. The development of large websites, it was just so confusing to keep track of the different fonts and colors and cosmetic attributes of their web pages. So to solve the problem, CSS was invented. So it kind of separated HTML, so HTML can be the building blocks of your web page, and CSS can handle all the formatting, the styling, the cosmetic part of it. So keeping those two separate makes things a whole lot less confusing and a lot easier to develop and code. So with an external style sheet, an external CSS file, you can change the look of an entire website by changing just one line of CSS. So the syntax of CSS, I come and I'm going to open up a brand new Notepad session. Oops, not open up. I'm going to go File, and then I'll do New File. And so the syntax of CSS is you have a selector, and you have a declaration, and then this would be declaration 1, and then you should have declaration 2, on up to infinity. All right. So when I say selector, I mean you want to give style to say the H1 tag. So I want to select all my H1 tags, right? So I would put H1, that's the selector, and then the declarations, the CSS declarations, go inside the curly brackets, right? So I'd have an open curly bracket, and say, for example, my first style was color, right? So color is the attribute, the property, and separate the property from the value with a colon, and then I'll give it the color red. And then you separate declarations from each other, the first one from the second one, and the second one from the third one, with a semicolon. And then you can put a space in there if you want. It makes it more readable. And so say the next declaration was font size, font dash size, and then a colon, and I'll make it pretty big. I'll make it 18 point or 18 pixels, and so that will be my font size, and then I'll close it with a semicolon and a curly bracket. All right. So that's the syntax of CSS. My selector in this case was for whatever web page, every H1 tag that I find, I'm going to give it a color of red and a font size of 18 pixels. So let's do a quick example of CSS. So in my Notepad session off to the left, I brought up an HTML template. So these are some of the basic tags you need for every HTML web page. So what I'm going to do inside the head tag, I'm going to get rid of the title. I don't need a title. And I'm going to replace it with script tag. So script. And a closing script tag. Okay, and then inside the script tag, I'm going to put a little bit of CSS. So remember, remember the syntax of CSS. So first, I want a selector. So I'm going to select a P tag. All right. So if you look down below in my program, inside the body tag, all I have is a P tag that says HTML class online. So I'm going to change that to CSS class online. All right. So now inside the script tags, which are inside the head tag, I'm gonna do my selector is going to be the P tag, right? The HTML P tag. So I want to select all the P tags inside my HTML program, and I want to style those P tags. So next you do the curly brackets, right? And then I'm going to indent inside of it. Too much. And the first attribute I'll add is color, right? So inside the P tag, or inside the CSS, the first property I want to change is the color of any P tags in my program. So color, and then it's colon, followed by a value. I'm going to use the red value, and then semicolon, right? And then underneath that, I want to change, I want to do another property. Why don't I do the font size that we did before? So font dash size, colon, right? I don't like the space after the colon. So I will not put one there. So font size, and then remember we did 18 pixels, PS, and then semicolon, and then you have to close it out with a curly bracket. And I like to line the curly bracket, the closing curly bracket for CSS underneath the selector. So in my example, I've got P as the selector, so the paragraph tag is the selector, and then I put the curly bracket lined up underneath the P tag. All right, so that's the format of CSS, and this is inline. This is inside an HTML program. But later on, I'll show you other ways where you can have an external CSS file, or you can have it inline, or you can have it directly. You can actually add style directly inside the elements of HTML. So I could put style. If you look at my program, I've got a P tag inside the body text, and I could put style directly inside this P tag, right? Just with the style attribute, style equals, and then whatever attribute and property. All right. So there's several ways to add CSS, and this way we're adding it inline inside the script tags of an HTML file. All right, so why don't we run this? I'm going to save it as, let's see, I will save it as, got to make sure I'm not saving as .txt, so all files, and then we're going to call it, what? CSS example? CSS ex.html, this is still an HTML file. All right, so save it, and then remember how to run it, right? Right-click on Start, click on File Explorer, and you just have to bring the file up and double-click on it to open it, and that will open it up inside a web browser. So, sorry. In the head tab, it's not the script tag, it's the style tag. Of course, we're dealing with style. So get rid of those script tags that I put. So style. And now this should work. So my one paragraph tag in my program is CSS Class Online. And that should come out as red and in a pretty big font of 18 pixels. So I will do a file, and now I just have to save it. I click File Explorer, and we'll double click on Css File. There it is. Now it doesn't look that much bigger though. So why don't I jack that up? The file size, let's make sure this is working. So why don't I make it like 28 pixels? Make it pretty big. Make sure that this is actually working. And I'll save it. And then over here, I can just close these other sessions out. So now I'm back to my one session, CSS.html. All I have to do is refresh it. I don't have to go to File Explorer. So see, when I refresh it, it went from 18 pixels to 28 pixels. So what if I made it 58 pixels? And do a file, and I'll just save it. And then over here, I'm just going to refresh it and see how the font size changes. Now, so that's the CSS Class Online. Now, what if I added, what if I go over to my program and I copy the paragraph tags, the P tags, right? And I put it underneath here and call it something else. Welcome, or not welcome, how about CSS, it's style to web page. Okay, so now I've got two P tags. And what if I wanted to, and I'm going to add an H1 tag. All right. And I will just say, I'll add the text, welcome to my class. Exclamation point, and then I have to do a closing. H1 tag. Right? So that's good. All right. So now, I'm going to run this. I'm going to save it. And then I come over to my browser session. All I have to do is refresh it. And see, it brings up welcome to my class. All right, that's my H1 tag, right? There's no style, right? The color is not red, and the font size is not 58. But now my program has two P tag statements, right? And both of them got the CSS style. Both of them are the color red, and they're the font size of the 58 pixels. So I hope that makes sense. Another thing I should do to this program is I want to copy this style that's using the selector of a P tag. And what if I had an H1 tag? So now my selector is H1. I'm going to make that color blue. So I'll make it a different style. And instead of messing with size, why don't I do another property, test. dash align. And instead of 58 pixels, I'm going to have center. Okay, so let's see if that is right. So now the H1 tag has a style all its own, and any P tags that I find will have a different style. All I have to do is do File and save this program, and then come over to my web browser and I'll do a refresh. And you can see the H1 tag now has a style, right? Because it has a color blue and it did the text align. So now it's centered. It's centered on the page. Where the P tags, they still have their original style. So let's go over the CSS selectors. All right, there's 5 basic categories of selectors. So the first one, which is what we did in this example, are called simple selectors. So these select elements, HTML elements, based on their name, based on an ID, or based on a class that's been assigned. All right, so let's take a look at those first. So we've already taken a look at how to select an HTML element. So if you look at the example on the left-hand side in Notepad, I selected an H1 element and I selected a P element. So what if the P element had an ID? So I'm going to take the first P element that says CSS class online, and inside the P tag, I'm going to add an ID. So the attribute is ID and equals, oops. So ID, and then the equal sign, and then double quote, and I'll call it the first P. Now IDs are case sensitive, so you have to, whatever value you give to the ID attribute, in this case it's first and then uppercase P. It has to be the same when you're referencing that ID. So now I only want to give, say I only want to give CSS style to a P tag or to any tag that has the ID first P. So the way to do that is to use the hashtag and then the ID name. So instead of doing P, I will do a hashtag. And then my ID name is first, capital P. All right, so with this in mind, when we run our program, so I saved it, and now I'm just going to refresh my page. So if you look over to the right in my web page, H1 is still a selector, and so that's just the style welcome to my class. The P tag, or the tag, the element that has an ID called first P, gets a style color red, font size 58, right? And the P tag, the P element that I gave the ID to, says CSS class online. If you look at the web browser, that's the line that got the style. Whereas the P tag, the second P tag that says CSS add style to my web page, that got no style at all, right? Because it wasn't referenced. So another way to select an element in CSS is using a class. So now I'm going to go down to the bottom of my program, and the second p tag, I'm going to give that a class. So it's just class equals double quotes, and I'll call this second p, capital P. Oops, capital P, double quotes, and that's it. And I'm going to give that a different style. So I'll copy this style. And it's okay to have blank lines. It actually makes your program more readable and more understandable. So when we're referencing a class, we use a dot. So it's dot second P. And I'll get rid of the first P. And now, why don't we have a different color value? What's a good one? How about green? So instead of red, I'll do green. And what's another CSS style we can use? Something to make it stand out. You can text the line. Let me find one. So I found, how about border? Border dash style, and colon, and then I'm going to give it a style of double. We'll see how that turns out. So this is referencing a class that we called second P, and we put it, we gave the class to the P tag, the second P tag in our program. So H1 is just a selector that we're calling the element H1. The first P tag, we give it an ID of first P. The second P tag, we give it a class of second P. And we have styles connected to all of those selectors, right? Through element H1, through an ID, which we preface with a hashtag, and then the name of the ID, and then a class, which we preface with a dot, and then the class name. Now, a class can be given to multiple elements. An ID has to be unique. So first P cannot be used in other elements. It can cause your program to blow up, all right? So an ID should be unique, all right? It has to be unique. So let's run this program. All I have to do is file, save, and then I'll come over to my web browser on the right-hand side, and I will click on refresh. And we already had H1 going on, right? That already had a style, and ID reference P tag had its style already. But the thing we changed was the class reference for the second P. So get this over here, okay. And what we added was we turned it green, we gave it the color green, and then we also gave it a double border. See how there's two lines that make up the border around this element? So that's how you reference this. This is the category of simple element selectors. So what if I wanted to group multiple HTML elements to have a style? So instead of H1, let's say, So if I wanted to have every H1 and every paragraph element on my page to have a certain style, I would, if you look in my Notepad section, I've already got H1, right? So H1, all you do is you separate the elements you want with a comma. So H1, comma, and then I want the paragraph tags to have this style also. So H1, comma, P, and turn them yellow. The color of yellow, I'll make it go center, protect the line center. And why don't I give it a font size, colon, and then the actual size is 20 pixels. All right, so let's see what happens. File, I'll save it, and I will refresh my page. So now I have one, in my program, I have one H1 tag and I have two P tags, and they all were selected. And they all have the color of yellow, text align center, and font size of 20. 20 doesn't look so big, so why don't we make it 50? I'll just do a file save real quick, and I'll refresh my page, and boom, now it's a little bit brighter. And the H1 tag, you notice H1s are, they're the biggest heading tag there is, right? In HTML, it's H1 down to H6, 6 being the smallest font, and H1s being the biggest, but H1 are also bold. So if you look in my web browser, welcome to my class, which is an H1 tag, is bold, whereas the two paragraph tags, those two lines are not. But they all have the font size of 50. So that's how you group selectors together. Now, I could do, instead of H1 and all the paragraph tags, what if I took out the P? What if I wanted to select the class second P? So it would be H1 comma dot second. Remember, classes have to be prefaced with a dot. Second P. All right, so now only the H1 tag and the second P tag should have this style. Save and refresh. And see, the first P tag, which is referenced by an ID and isn't referenced by the class. Now this no longer has any style. Now another thing I want to show you, how you're able to attach a class to multiple elements. Whereas remember, if you attach an ID, that ID has to be unique to that element. You can't use the ID multiple times. It has to be unique in your program. So the way to do this, why don't we get rid of the H1 and I'm going to change the color, make it purple. All right. So I'm referencing the class second P. So I've got dot second P, and down here the second P tag already has class equals second P. But what if I do the same for this tag, right? So this, instead of having an ID for the first P tag, I'll use class equals, and I'll call it second P. So any element that has the class of second P will get this style up above. So now, when I run this, I'll save it, And when I refresh my page, I should have the heading tag should have no style, the H1 tag, and both P tags should have the style of purple, text align center, and a font size of 50. There you go. If you look over on the right, my web browser, I've got welcome to my class. It has no style. It's it's an H1 tag, so it's going to be bold and it's going to be kind of large. And my two P tags are now purple, and they're center aligned, and they have a font size of 50. So that's how you can group things. You can either group multiple selectors and separate them by a comma, or you can assign a class to multiple elements, and any element that has that class will get the reference style. So there are 3 ways to insert CSS. The first way is with an external CSS file. So let's take this style information out. So I'll just delete that out. And why don't we, I'm going to put that back actually. So why don't I cut it? I'll cut it out of here. And I would go and create a new file. So file should be new. And let's take that. And I will paste the style in here. And I can get rid of the style tags, right? Remember, this is an external, this is an HTML page referencing an external CSS file, right? And this is the best, this is probably the most efficient way to use CSS. That's why I'm showing it to you first. Oops. And so in this CSS file, you want to go all the way over to the left. And I'll tab here. So here we have the style. And so now we're going to call this file, we're going to save it. And oops. So I have all files. And so I'm going to call this, I'll call it external CSS dot. And now it's not a .html file. This is a .css file. All right. So why don't I get rid of the CSS? So I'm just going to call my file external.css. So .css. I want to save it as .css. All right. So I save it. I save it in my CSS folder. So now what I want to do is I want to open up my previous program. And I just have to do all files. So my previous program was called CSS external.html. Okay? So there's no style in here any longer in the head tags. And I've got an H1 tag, and I've got a P tag and a P tag, and they have the class P. So I'm going to take out the class P in this this P tag. All right, so if you remember, our CSS file is referencing a class called section P, and it's going to give it a style of text align center, color purple, it's going to give it the style that's over in my web browser on the right-hand side, right? A font size of 50, text center line. All right. So, but I only have one p tag referencing this class called second p. All right. So that's sure enough. What I have to do inside the head tags in my HTML page is I have to add what we call a link tag. And the syntax is like this. So we have link. And inside the link, you're going to have a few attributes. So we have rel equals, and this will be style sheet, double quotes, space. And then the type is going to equal, and then double quotes. And it's going to be text.css, double quotes, space. And then we need an href. And it's going to equal, and since it's in the folder that this HTML program is, we're going to reference our external CSS file. And what did I call it? I called it external.css. Double quotes, and then close out the link tag. That should be it. So in the HTML head tags, we're adding a link tag that's going to we're calling a style sheet. The type is text/CSS, and the href is the name of our file. So all I have to do is save this, and then I have to run it. So right click, start at the bottom left, hit File Explorer, and I'll make this a little bit shorter. File Explorer and CSS, and I am running CSS external.html, which is going to reference the external.css file. Hit enter, and there you have it. So if you look at our program, right, it's referencing that external, using the link tag in my HTML file, it's referencing the external CSS file, which gave style to any HTML element that had a class of second P. And you can see, only in our program, only this first P tag had a class equal to second P. So that got a style of purple, font size 50, and center align. Whereas the second P tag didn't get any style, and the H1 tag didn't get any style. It might look like it does, but H1 is always bold, and it's always pretty large. So that wraps it up for tonight. We'll start the second session next week with the other two ways that you can reference CSS styles. So once again, please register with the Clifton Park Half Moon Library to participate in this class. The sessions are pre-recorded, and they will be populated. They will be presented through YouTube. But once you register, I'll have your email, and then I will invite you to the Google Classroom, where for each session I'll have multiple exercise challenges for you. So thanks again for joining me tonight, and hope to see you next week. Thanks.